Good morning, everyone. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 33, text number 39. Vikreditam rajabadu viridam cha Vishnu Shraddhan vito nishnuyat atavarna yedya Bhaktim baram bhagavati pratilabhya kamam Vṛndāvana mashpa pahinotya charinatira Vikreditam, the sporting, Vrajavadupi, with the young women of Vṛndāvana. Idam, this, cha, and Vishnu, by Lord Vishnu, Shraddhanbhata, faithfully, Ashrinu hears, Ata, or Varnayat, describes, Ya, who, Bhaktim, devotional service, Param, transcendental, Bhagavati, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Pratilabhya, obtaining, Kamam, material lust, Rit, in the heart, Rogam, the disease, Ashu, quickly, Apahinoti, he drives away, Achirena, without delay, Dhira, sober. Anyone who faithfully hears or describes the Lord's playful affairs with the young gopīs of Vṛndāvana will attain the Lord's pure devotional service. Thus, he will quickly become sober and conquer lust, the disease of the heart. The servants of Srila Prabhupada's purport. The extraordinary power of Lord Krishna's conjugal pastimes is clearly revealed here. Qualitatively, the Lord's spiritual loving pastimes are the diametric opposite of material lusty affairs. So much so that simply by hearing about the Lord's pastimes, a devotee conquers sex desire. By reading pornographic literature or hearing about material romance, we certainly do not conquer sex desire, but rather increase our lust. But hearing or reading about the Lord's conjugal affairs has exactly the opposite effect, because they are of the opposite nature, being purely spiritual. Therefore, it is by the causeless mercy of Lord Krishna that he exhibits his Rasa Leela within this world. If we become attached to this narration, we will experience the bliss of spiritual love and thus reject the perverted reflection of that love, which is called lust. As nicely put by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita 2:59, Param Drishva Nivartate, once having directly experienced the Supreme, one will not return to material pleasures. We offer our respectful obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and to all the previous Acharyas who have passed down the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, and to all the assembled devotees, you who have dedicated your lives to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and practicing its tenets. Vanchakalpataruscha kripasindubhe evacha patitanam pavanibhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. This is a famous verse which is indicative of the power of hearing transcendental sound vibration, and there are important words within the verse. One of them is Shraddhanvita, Ashrinuyat, Dhira. I'll speak on these three words to start with. Ashrinuyat means one must continue speaking Krishna Katha. There's a way in which the Srimad Bhagavatam itself just prescribes Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, which means that our hearing about the Lord must be regular. And then the word Shraddhanvita means it has to be done with a clear idea about who we're speaking of. Shraddha generally is translated as faith. And Shraddhanvita means that in hearing about, especially the topic of this verse, which is Raja Vadubhi, the pastimes of Lord Krishna with his associates in Vṛndāvana, especially the cowherd damsels of Vṛndāvana and Srimati Radharani, whom we're always reticent to mention, but because it's Radhashtami, we may do so. And this means that we have to have an understanding, as Prabhupada points out in his Radhashtami lecture from 1971, that the pastimes of Krishna and the pastimes of those who are engaged in mundane love affairs in the material world are categorically different. One is, as Kaviraj Goswami says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, lust, which is like iron, and another, which is prema, or love for Krishna, is gold. Yes, they may appear to be two metals, and one might say, well, it's just metal, metal's metal. But the difference is profound. And hearing about mundane subject matters, anyat evahor sambhavat, anyadahora sambhavat, iti shushruma dhiranam yenas tadvich shakshire, has a different result from hearing about mundane subject matters. Did I say mundane first? Or mundane and transcendental are completely different. It says, say the great sages that are dhira. And therefore, in approaching the subject matter of the 10th canto, understanding the residents of Vṛndāvana or Srimati Radharani, one must be, the third word, dhira, which means serious. It's not a topic for dabblers or those who are academicians, but it's for the serious student who's engaged in devotional service. One doesn't have to be a great scholar, but one has to be sincere. And dhira means that one has taken the time and trouble to hear sufficiently to understand that I'm not this body, I'm not part of the material world. And to come to a conclusion that I'm also a servant of the servant of the servant. Famous preface verse for any kind of deity worship is that in which the devotee is saying that I'm not any material designation, but I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. Naham bipro nacha narapatir napi vaishuna shudro. Naham barni nacha gripatir no manasto yatirva. Kintu prodyan nikala paramananda purnamrita dir gopi parakamali or das anudasaha. There's a way in which the devotee renounces all sense of having some position that gives one an advantage. The devotee feels, as Kunti says, Janmai Shrai Shuta Shribir Edamana Madapuman Naivar Yavidatum Vaitoma Kinchanagocharam, that all these ideas that I have some qualification to understand Krishna are one's disqualification. Therefore, she says, Namo Kinchana Vrittaya Nivritta Guna Vrittaye Atmaramaya Shantaya Kaivalya Pataye Namaha. That the qualification is that one should think, I am das, and dasaha. And yesterday, we were talking to Nihar Prabhu of Southern California. He's born into the Krishna conscious movement, and also somehow by Krishna's arrangement, he's our tax accountant. And we were just discussing a couple of topics, one our taxes, and the other the Bhakti Jumpstart course. And then he was saying that he came across a question that was, if anybody's taken the Bhakti Jumpstart course, you know there's a question there, who's your favorite devotee? And he said, I can't decide. I said, Prahlad. And he said, no, not quite. I said, Dhruva. And he's like, no. He said, what I'm thinking is, in the pastime of Gaudicha, there are thousands of devotees that sheet back to the Ganga where they're filling pots of water and they're passing them along the line, and it comes all the way to Lord Chaitanya and his associates in the temple. He said, I'm more down the line there. I want to be one of the pot holders at the beginning of the line who's serving this servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. No real name. That's the devotee I want to emulate, and that's what I consider the greatest. Is that all right? I said, bravo, never heard that answer. And this is the result of Srinuyat, hearing properly in the right context to understand that I can't barge into the spiritual world. One of Prabhupada's godbrothers, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, had written a verse that the devotees chanted on their way to the new temple in Bagh Bazar when they were going along the roadway with the deities, and they were chanting. And that song was about how we're down here and we keep the pastimes of Vṛndāvana, with the speak of Srimati Radharani, way above our heads. And we're like this. Not that we claim any qualification for entry. In fact, in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, there's a way in which all the devotees who are interviewed by Narada all claim disqualification and point to somebody else. And even when he gets to the gopīs in Vṛndāvana, he says, us? We have no qualification. And this is dhira. Tachradhana muniyo gana vairagya yuktaya pashyantyatmani chatmanam bhakta shruta grihitaya. There's a way in which one must edify oneself. One has to grow into the sobriety of Krishna consciousness by hearing for a long time and with great seriousness. Again, I'll invoke the amazing recital we went to the other day with our very own Sadhu Vṛndāvana, who's no longer here, so I'm a little morose. He went oh, there he is, okay. And that, it was a different context altogether. But there was a way in which those consummate musicians who were there were dead serious about the topic of music. And even Sadhu, to me, he was playing perfectly, but to them, he was full of holes. And that it takes one to know one. In other words, the consummate musician who was there, who had been a prodigy since he was 2, and then everyone said, no, he's the best in the world in Carnatic music. He was dhira about music. And you're like, okay, if you want this, you have to study it deeply. You have to play for hours a day until your hands bleed. And there's a way, this Tachradhana munayo jnana vairagya yuktaya se. There's a qualification for entering into these pastimes. And as Prabhupada quotes, the entry, Atashi Krishna namadi nabhaved grahimindre sevamukhi jivado swayameva sprata. You have to be the servant, 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 servant. And your whole being must be saturated with this sense of very deep humility and service. Otherwise, there's no access whatsoever. No one can cheat their way in. And there are ways in which people manhandle these delicate pastimes of the spiritual world, thinking that by some genealogical qualification, it was passed down, my family's family recited Srimad Bhagavatam, I know how to do it. That attitude, then it gets passed down, and then there's Bhagavat Saptaha. Somebody knows how to sing all the songs and sit with one leg over the other and do this, or whatever it may be. This is not the qualification. These things are not prohibited, but the point is, any kind of artifice in the matter of discussing these or any other topics in the Srimad Bhagavatam are disallowed. One must have this sense of complete seriousness and enter in as a servant of the servant of the servant and have the mood of great dedication. Then there's the foundation nashrunuyat, this faithful context by which one can move forward in Krishna consciousness. And then Bhagavata Shri Prabhu and I will share realizations back and forth, so I invite my dear godbrother to say whatever he wishes.
Hare Krishna. While you were speaking, I was reflecting on the need for becoming steady and constant in one's practice. And I was recalling a story I heard of a famous violinist who was, I forget his name, but he was asked, how often do you practice? And he said, I practice every day. He said, if I don't practice for one day and I perform that night, I know it. And then he said, if I don't practice for 2 days and I perform that night, then anyone who knows me knows it. And then he said, if I don't practice for 3 days straight and I perform that night, everybody knows it. So the idea that I like this principle of dhira is very important in that we're very sober about this, that we don't think, I've made it. I can recite so many verses from the Bhagavatam and so forth. Not that, of course, that's any disqualification, but to think that, I can read books and repeat quotations and impress something upon somebody, but at the same time, Krishna points out very clearly in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that if you're doing that, but at the same time your mind is not fixed on this, you're thinking about objects of sense gratification, then he says you're a pretender and you're deluding yourself. So that principle of honesty is very, very important in the development of any genuine realization of Krishna consciousness. I'd just like to say a bit about the word realization as well, because the word eyes, the word ending of eyes, we see it in many places in English. Civilize, naturalize, so many words, realize. But what we use it very, I realized this and I realized that. But what is actually happening by the process of realization? What do you have to accept in the first place in order to become realized? You have to accept that we're in the middle of unreality. Everything around us is unreal. And everything we're hearing that is not Krishna consciousness is illusion. Prabhupada makes the point in the early days when they made the Happening album, and he gives a monologue there about the holy name, and he says this Krishna consciousness is not an artificial imposition on the mind, but everything else is. We have to be sure of that everything except anything to do with Krishna is an artificial imposition on the mind, because it's leading us into unreality and an unreal conception of ourselves. I'm a little overawed sitting here next to Vaisheshika Prabhu. He's a great scholar of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and I am not. But I thought, just in apropos of this verse, if I could read something from the 2nd canto, which I never cease to be stunned by. It's from the 4th chapter of the 2nd canto, which is called The Process of Creation. It begins with a number of questions by Parikshit Maharaj. And before he begins to answer, then from verse 12 to verse 24, Sukadev recites a prayer. And then he goes into answering the question. And the last verse of that prayer is, I find, very significant. in regard to also this. Yes? Am I too far away?
You got to keep it close.
I got to keep it close. I'm always scared of these things. The verse is Namas tasmai bhagavate vasudevaya vedhase papur jnanam ayam somya yanmukam buru hashavam. Translation is, I offer my respectful obeisances unto Srila Vyasadeva, the incarnation of Vasudeva, who compiled the Vedic scriptures. The pure devotees drink up the nectarian transcendental knowledge dropping from the lotus-like mouth of the Lord. It's a short purport, but I'll draw your attention, pay very close attention as we go through it, because the last sentence is very profound. In pursuance of the specific utterance Vedhase, or the compiler of the system of transcendental knowledge, Srila Sridhar Swami has commented that the respectful obeisances are offered to Srila Vyasadeva, who is an incarnation of Vasudeva. Srila Jiva Goswami has agreed to this. But Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur has made a further advance, namely that the nectar from the mouth of Lord Krishna is transferred to his different consorts, and thus they learn the finer arts of music, dance, dressing, decorations, and all such things which are relished by the Lord. Such music, dance, and decorations enjoyed by the Lord are certainly not anything mundane, because the Lord is addressed in the very beginning as para, or transcendental. This transcendental knowledge is unknown to the forgotten conditioned souls. Srila Vyasadeva, who is an incarnation of the Lord, thus compiled the Vedic literatures to revive the lost memory of the conditioned souls about their eternal relation with the Lord. One should therefore try to understand the Vedic scriptures, or the nectar transferred by the Lord to his consorts in the conjugal humor, from the lotus-like mouth of Vyasadeva or Sukadeva. These last two sentences are very important. By gradual development of transcendental knowledge, one can rise to the stage of the transcendental arts of music and dance displayed by the Lord in his Rasa Lila. But without having the Vedic knowledge, one can hardly understand the transcendental nature of the Lord's rasa dance and music. The pure devotees of the Lord, however, can equally relish the nectar in the form of the profound philosophical discourses and in the form of kissing by the Lord in the rasa dance, as there is no mundane distinction between the two. This is one of those purports that on maybe several rereadings, you read it and you think, how did I miss this? How did I miss this? But this is something that I always appreciate about Vaisheshika Prabhu, is that his relish for hearing and studying the transcendental literatures is actually a sign of, as we say here, great sobriety and great enthusiasm. We see by this statement there's no difference between this activity and actually being in the rasa dance with the Lord and being kissed by him. There's no difference qualitatively. So getting a taste for hearing and chanting the scriptures is a very important thing. It's not just a regulated activity. It is a regulated activity, but the essence of what we're doing is totally on the transcendental platform. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. In speaking on Radhashtami, Srila Prabhupada invoked the verse from the Mangalacharana from the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Radha Krishna Pranaya Vikritir Ladini Shakti Rasmat Ekat Manab Apipuvipura Deha Bedam Gatau Tau Chaitanyakyam Prakadamarana Tadvayam Chaikyamatam Radha Bhava Dutu Suvalitam Nami Krishna Surupam. And in speaking on this, for Radhashtami, Srila Prabhupada then mentions that Krishna is one, as we know from the Bhagavatam, as described by Sutta Goswami at the outset. He's Advaya Gyan Tattva. Advaya means there's no second. Everything's Krishna. But there are varieties. Vedanti tattvavidas tattvam yajgyanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. That within that oneness, there's variety. And why? Because variety is the mother of enjoyment. And Prabhupada also quoted Eko Bahusham, Vedic verse which says, there's one supreme, but the supreme expands himself into many for his own enjoyment. And then Prabhupada talks about how Maya jakshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam. He says that the material world is a dead place until the Lord glances over it. By his glance, he infuses it with the living entities, and time and the three modes of material nature appear by the Kala Shakti of the Lord. And he said, similarly, this body, it's just chemicals, and without the spirit soul in the body, then it's dead. And that real life means Krishna and Krishna's energies in relationship. So Prabhupada goes on to say that there are unlimited energies. In fact, the meaning of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Krishna and his energies, but what are his energies for? They're Radha Krishna Pranaya Vikriti Hladini Shakti Rasmad. They're for his enjoyment. God exists for himself and for his own enjoyment, and all the energies of the Lord are meant for his enjoyment as well. And Srila Prabhupada describes how the material world is a place where when people try to enjoy, there's an opposite effect. Hlada tapa traya, Jiva Goswami says, means we as parts of Krishna have the same impetus to enjoy, because Krishna is a reservoir of enjoyment and we're part of Krishna, so we have that same urge to enjoy. But when we're misguided and we try to enjoy the material energy, Hlada tapatraya means we get the opposite result. And Prahlad Maharaj says the same thing. He said, you even try to think about enjoying the material world, that's when you start suffering. The very moment you plan for it. What to speak of, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukha yone evate adyantavanta konteya nate shuramate buddha. That there's this relationship we have, a non-symbiotic relationship with the material world, that when we try to touch it, then we get the result of misery. And what's that all about? It's about our misidentification with ourselves as being part of the material world. And therefore, bhayam dvitiya abhinibesha tasyad, because we see something separate from Krishna, then we are full of fear. So Krishna exhibits his pastimes so that we can become attracted back to our original happy position, which is that of remembering him, thinking of his pastimes and so forth, in which this verse today says if one's thinking of the relationships of Krishna in the spiritual world, then we can bhaktim param bhagavate pratilabhya kamam hridroga ashvapahino tacharena tira very quickly rise above the attachments we have in the material world, and we can bhaktim param bhagavate pratilabhya kamam. We can attain the highest level of of bhakti. And regarding the topic of Radhashtami, Prabhupada then says, although Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's Madan Mohan, when you approach Krishna as Madan Mohan and you become attached, Jaitam Surato Pangor Mama Manda Matiragati Mat Sarvasva Padambo Jau Radha Madana Mohanau. There's a way in which our relationship with Madan Mohan is so foundational because it's our point of transferring our attraction from the material world to Krishna. And then one who has the sense of attachment from Madan Mohan then is no longer interested in the attachments he or she has in the material world. And then Prabhupada describes that Srimati Radharani is Madan Mohan Mohini, that the supreme attractor, Krishna, this very name means attractor of everyone and everything, is attracted to something else or someone else. So that's a conundrum in the spiritual world. It's something even Krishna can't figure out. And sometimes people say, yeah, well, can God create a rock that's so heavy he can't lift it himself? And I was thinking this morning on the way here that there's a way that someone might ask, can there be a situation that he creates from his energies that he can't understand? And the answer to the rock is, yes, he can, but then he'll lift it anyway. And the answer to the conundrum, is there a situation created by Krishna through his energies that he can't understand? And the answer is yes, but then he tries to understand it through Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because it's so inconceivable that there's a personality who's the counterpart of Krishna, who's the source of everyone and everything, who's so attractive and whose love is so perfect that he loses his mind. So much so that he wonders, who is this and why am I so attracted and why am I carried away by the love of Srimati Radharani? And therefore, on Radhashtami, Prabhupada invoked this verse, and leading to Shri Radhaya Pranaya Mahima Kidrishovanayaeva Swadyo Yena Bhutam Adarima Kidrishova Mariyaha Saukyam Chasya Mad Anubhavata Kidrisham Beti Lobat Tadbhavata Samajani Sachigarba Sindhu Harindu. That Krishna became enamored of the power of Srimati Radharani's love and wanted to know its greatness. And he also wanted to taste its sweetness. And he wanted to feel what Srimati Radharani feels when she sees Krishna, him, in the spiritual world. So he came as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Prabhupada's pointing out in his talk on Radhashtami in 1971 that we can take advantage of that. Normally, if Krishna can't understand Srimati Radharani, what are our hopes of understanding him? And Prabhupada writes in his purport in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, these two transcendentalists, he says, Radha and Krishna, he said, are a great puzzlement to the general public, like Radha and Krishna. In fact, I showed somebody the other day, Radha Krishna, it's God but two, he has a girlfriend. And like, what? And he said, even Krishna can't understand. So he comes as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And as a result of that, there's a way in which he makes it available, the understanding and the relationship to everybody else. And our Gaudiya Acharyas point out that, of course, Radha, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Radha Krishna Nahiyanya, that this comment, as Ramananda Roy remarked, oh, I get it. You're Radha and Krishna combined. And as other acharyas like Prabhupada Saraswati had commented, yata yata Gaurapadada Vinde, that by worshiping Lord Chaitanya, then one can come to know the mystery of Radha and Krishna. And as Prabhupada, following the mood of all the acharyas, says, you can't understand without that. Which gives an amazing effect, because in the Kali Yuga, which is already pronounced as an age for people who have hit rock bottom. Prayanal Payusha Shavya Kalavasmi Nugajana. Manda Sumana Matayo Mana Bhagya Padrita. At Daimashanya 5,000 years ago, they said, wow, this age is a washout. What are you going to do? And what happens in this age is the most miraculous, is that Krishna, for his own purposes of understanding Srimati Radharani, happens to appear at the time when the Yuga avatar appears, and normally he sends somebody else to take care of it. But this time he's saying, I'll come myself, because he was here recently, 5,000 years ago is not that long ago, even in geological time, what to speak from the spiritual perspective. Chiram chirat karuna yavatirna kalau samarpayitumuna tojvara rasam sopakti shriyam hari purata sundara dyutik kadamba sandipita sada hridaya kandare spuratu vasachinandana. Krishna thinks, for a long time I haven't told anybody about this relationship I have in the spiritual world. I mean, what good is it if you have the best thing and then you can't tell anybody? In fact, when you get something nice, that's the first thing you want to do, right? I'm not supposed to tell anybody, but... And that was Lord Krishna's mood. For Kali Yuga, it's a washout age. It's already announced from Naimisharanya, these people don't know anything. They're really slow. They don't get it. I'm like, yeah, but I got to tell everybody. So he comes in Kali Yuga, and a great benediction is that he has his own agenda that he wants to understand. Srimati Radharani's love, the greatness of her love. So then, in the process of spreading the Yuga Dharma, it's infused with this loving relationship that Krishna has with Radharani in the spiritual world, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu becomes the ambassador of that love from the spiritual world and distributes it to everybody else. Therefore, it's a great wonderment that the Kali Yuga, the lowest age, gives us access somehow or other to the highest conception of the spiritual world. That is the love between Radha and Krishna. And I thought we'd take a few questions, because we just have a few minutes left, and Bhagavata Shai Prabhu will share answering them. Prabhu, could we share microphones, please? We'd like to cut down the time that the microphone gets passed, and also...
We've got two now.
Well, how long it takes to turn them on. That's another thing I've been thinking of tabulating, because we could add a few extra months on our lives. Okay, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the class. So I always feel that many times Vishnu and Krishna are interchangeably used. For example, in Prahlad Maharaj prayers, we see the Navvida Bhakti, there Vishnu is used, and Matirna Krishna Parato Sotova. So we have Krishna and Vishnu interchangeably used. Also in this verse, which we took, there's Vishnu. At the same time, we understand that Vishnu is an expansion of Krishna, and he has 4 lesser qualities than Krishna. So, as you mentioned, we should clearly know what we are discussing about. We should clearly identify, what we are discussing. You quoted Ishopanishad. So how is this that they are being interchangeably used, Vishnu and Krishna? I mean, why is it not specific?
Yes, I understand your question. So this word Vishnu means he who pervades everything. Actually, it means he who enters within everything. Like Eko Pyasora Charitam Jagaranda Kotim Yash Shakti Rasti Jagaranda Chayayaranta Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham. This is kind of a definition of Vishnu. Vishnu's that person who's entered everywhere within everything. And in this verse, which is an esoteric verse, it's by context, it's the last verse of the Rasa Lila. So what it means here, according to our acharyas, that is Vishnu Chakravarti, Jiva Goswami, and Sanatana Goswami, Vishnu means that Krishna has entered in the rasa dance, and he's entered within the circle and expanded himself so he's there with everybody. Just like Andantarasta Paramanu, he's with every soul within their heart. Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hridaya Shara Janatishtati, Brahmayan Sarvabhutani Yantra Rudrani Maya. So in this context, what our acharyas say is Vishnu here means, it's not referring to Vaikuntha or the Vishnu of the material world per se, but what it's talking about is the use of the word Vishnu, that Krishna avails himself to his devotees in the rasa dance by expanding himself so he's there with each one of them. In other words, he enters into the relationship with each one, and it's a trick he pulls in a lot of places, including at the dancing at the Rath Yatra. Some devotees like Prachaparudra Maharaj and others can see, oh, I get it. He's dancing in all 7 kirtan parties. That's Vishnu. He's entered. He enters everywhere. And that's what our acharyas say the word Vishnu is doing in this verse. Om Tat Sat. Prabhu?
Thank you, Guru Maharaj, for a nice class. Done with Pranam Jai Shri Prabhupada. So, Krishna thinks in spiritual world that he can't understand Srimati Radharani, so he comes as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he comes only once, or he comes in every Brahma's incarnation? If he comes in every universe, right? How does that work? That he's thinking every time that he can't understand, and again he's coming, or?
Would you like to answer that?
Well, this is an eternal lila. It's not that it just suddenly occurs to him. He's also eternally involved in this. In terms of its appearance in this material world, it's once in a day of Brahma. So therefore, it's 36,000 times in the course of a creation. So the thing that you have to be concerned about, or the thing that you have to be glad about and very happy about, is that you're here now. Because what have you been doing the last trillion years? Somehow or another, we are in this place at this time. This is a very, very significant thing. And as a result of that, we have the opportunity to enter into Nitya Lila.
For very niggling details, read the Laghu Bhagavatamrita. Because Rupa Goswami goes into excruciating detail about all these. He wants to answer all these questions and tie up all loose ends. So if you really like to brace yourself, you can read the Laghu Bhagavatamrita. At least the first half is tedious, but it answers these kinds of questions. Yes. Okay, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you.
You're good.
Yeah, thank you for the class. Maharaj, you mentioned Krishna exhibits his pastimes so that we can very quickly attain the higher levels of bhakti. And personally, I relish hearing and even discussing Leelas of Raja, like maybe Kusum Sarovar and Radha Kund, Shyam Kund and Man Mandir or More Kutir, all those places. And at the same time, it seems based on the initial discussion, does it mean that we should be a little careful, or by no standard I am deep into the scriptures as such? So what was the initial understanding from the initial talk of this lecture? Is it prohibited kind of? Because at the same time, you only mentioned right now, what good it is if we have the best thing, but we can't tell anyone.
Yes. So the Prabhupada said we do not boycott Srimati Radharani, but the way that we approach is important. And we learned, all of us in ISKCON, a lesson when the Chaitanya Charitamrita came out in 1975. There were a group of devotees who speculated, and they thought that they would exclusively hear parts of the Chaitanya Charitamrita that were about the conjugal pastimes of Krishna and Radharani, to the exclusion of all other kinds of pastimes, including the Bhagavad Gita, which they decided to eschew based on their speculative understanding that if they just poured over the conjugal pastimes of the Lord in association with others who were similarly dedicated, so much so that they created a club called the Gopi Bhava Club, that they would very quickly attain Gopi Bhava. And Prabhupada said that wasn't the idea of this. And it was because he said one has to, and he mentions this in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, go by categories. We may notice when we go through the first 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, predicaments of various personalities that resemble our own predicaments in the material world. I don't know what the definition of predicament is, but maybe our research department can figure it out really fast. There's a way in which we get entangled in the material world, and it's really difficult to get out of. Even Devahuti says to Kapila Dev, you know, I'm hearing all this, but it really seems impossible to get out of this situation. And Kapila Dev says you have to hear these topics for a long time to come to a state of qualification. And Prabhupada said that we should not exclusively try to hear any particular part of the Shastra. In fact, it's recommended go through the first 9 cantos before you come to the 10th canto. So why did Prabhupada stop translating and commentating on the third canto in his marathon to finish the Bhagavatam? Does anybody know the answer? Why did he take a hiatus? Vijay, of course, knows. Go ahead.
Because he wanted everybody to hear the passage of Krishna, because he didn't know who
He wrote the Krishna book. He took time off from the 3rd canto onward for a little while to finish the Krishna book. And the reason is it's so important to hear these pastimes of Krishna. And Prabhupada offered the Krishna book to the world. It was mass-produced and distributed. So what's that all about? Prabhupada painstakingly gives context throughout the summary of the 10th canto so that nobody makes a mistake. And if you that doesn't strike a chord with you, read it again. Because you'll notice that he interjects within the various aspects of the discussion of various pastimes of Krishna, especially, well, all of them, to give context that Krishna, from Bhagavad Gita, from Sri Upanishad, from logic and so forth, so nobody misunderstands. And that also happens in the Rasa dance chapter itself, because Parikshit Maharaj is listening, and there's a big assembly. Have you ever been in a room? A lot of people come in. I was at Baltimore the other night. There's at least 300 people in the temple room. And I said, is anybody new here? And 2 people raised their hand. So downshift, first gear, not even 3rd or 4th. Start with, and similarly, Parikshit Maharaj noticed, oh, there's some Gyanis around here, and they're starting to look a little perturbed with this discussion of Krishna dancing with other people's wives at the dead of night. So he said to Shukadeva Goswami during the conversation, yeah, why is he doing this? Because he wanted Shukadeva to explain it, to give the categorical knowledge. Well, actually, just as a child plays with his shadow. Like God is playing with his energies. They're already his energies. They're not really other people's wives. And so forth. Gives context because it's easy to misunderstand. So we're rather protected by Prabhupada's presentation of Krishna's pastimes. So what he taught us about the Gopi Bhava Club, which he disbanded summarily and totally, he said, don't try to be exclusive before you're ready. Learn all the categories. Know the Bhagavad Gita. Even the great Paramahamsas, when they read Bhagavad Gita over and over again, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at Tota Gopinath with Gadadhar Pandit, he could have read anything, but he read Dhruva Maharaj and he read Prahlad Maharaj hundreds of times. And he was weeping. And even the gopīs had said in the Chaitanya Bhagavat commentary, they would listen to pastimes of Dhruva and they think, tears would come to their eyes. So we're not to skip over anything and think, I'll just go directly to something. And it's kind of the American way. You know, if turmeric works, let's get some scientific process so we can get it down on the molecular level to super turmeric. To make your eyes turn yellow. Can't you make it stronger? Not really. It's more like an Ayurveda, you know, you're like, balance everything out and take it as a lifestyle change. And then gradually you'll get healthy. American medicine, oh, come on, just shoot it in my arm. I want to feel it now. And that's the approach many people have. I'll just go right to the top and take the straight thing immediately. And we're guided by our acharyas and protected that we should approach very humbly and be very careful. But he said, in that context, we do not boycott Srimati Radharani. Obviously, from this verse, you have to take it. We're guided by the verse itself. And the Shrunuyad means, Shraddhanvito means you have to take it in with the proper understanding. The faith has to be there. Okay, let's go just the last couple. You have one? And then we have Shastrasar Prada.
I think the word predicament is a noun, and it means unpleasant, dangerous, or trying situation.
Wow. And where does it come from?
It comes from Latin, predicatus, from pre, which means forth or before, and decare, proclaim.
What's the first one name? Pray?
P-R-A-E.
P-R-A-E means what?
Forth or before.
Forth or be?
Before.
Before. And then?
Decare, which means proclaim.
How do you spell decare?
D-I-C-A-R-E.
Decare. Decare means what?
Proclaim.
Proclaim. So how does that mean a dangerous situation? Predicare. Uh-oh, we're in a predicament now because we're losing
Predicare
everybody.
is like assert, proclaim, or declare publicly. And then predicamentum, which is quality, category, something predicted, that which is asserted.
Yeah, Krishna asserts in the Bhagavad Gita, it's a place of misery. And it's predicted that if you try to enjoy here, you're going to suffer. So it's a predicament. Yes, please.
I had a question about the idea of being a servant of the servant, which is something we touched on earlier. And as you often say, we shouldn't also become a doormat. So I was wondering how we can differentiate between these two, and in positions where we are a doormat, what should we do?
What's the question?
We talk about being a servant of the servant, but then sometimes it's not that you should become a doormat. So how do you be humble and be the servant of the servant, and at the same time not be just dominated by others who might be bullies or tyrannically minded?
Oh, that's a good question. How do you not be a doormat and be bullied? Well, you stand up to the bullies, for one thing. You don't take this nonsense, and you avoid the association of such people. One thing that you have a right and responsibility to do is to use your intelligence to know what is to your benefit and what is not to your benefit in the development of devotional service. So humility doesn't mean you don't have any self-respect. The problem with having a lack of self-respect is actually a lack of education, because we need to know what the self is and what the purpose of our life is. So you also need to distinguish between what is false ego and what is real ego. That real, somebody who is actually situated on the platform of das, anudas will not bully you, will not try to walk all over you and make you a doormat and make you do stupid things that are supposedly in the service of the Lord. This is a difficulty in a society where we are still prakrita bhakta, because the desire to Prabhupada explains at the end of the purport of the 20th verse of the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, there are two things which have to be vanquished in the execution of devotional service, in the association of pure devotees. And those two things he describes as the weakness of the heart. And the first thing is the desire to dominate the material world. Everyone comes to the material world with that desire. And Prabhupada says it has to be vanquished, just annihilated from your consciousness. Because what follows from that is the desire then to enjoy what you dominate. And this is the material world. So these things you have to learn to see that in yourself, and you have to be able to see it where it's being manifested and avoid it. Years ago, I was with Atmatattva Prabhu in Mayapur, and he made a very funny comment where he said, Srila Prabhupada is such a great mystic yogi that he's come into the material world, and inside the material world, he's manifested the spiritual world. And he's brought us from the material world into that spiritual world. And we are such great mystic yogis that inside the spiritual world that Prabhupada has manifested inside the material world, we have again manifested the material world. So you have a right and a responsibility in this regard. Like if somebody accuses you, a devotee is always humble, but if you're accused of something abominable when you didn't do it, then you have every right to stand up for yourself and say, no, I did not do this. So humility is not something that comes easy either, to actually be in a proper humble state of mind. But practicing that in the association of devotees who are in a humble state of mind, a genuine humble state of mind, is the goal. You have the right to choose your association.
Sarvamangala. And then we'll go to Shastra.
I can't remember the full story, my husband might know it, when Prabhupada said, if you are nothing but a fig, I can say you are nothing but a fig.
Yes. Yes. Well, that was an incident where Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked Prabhupada on a morning walk in 1976, what is the difference between criticism, fault-finding, and blasphemy? And Prabhupada said, criticism is simple. If you are nothing but a fig, and I'm saying you are nothing but a fig, where is the problem? Fault finding is, well, he gives the example of the fly and the bee. But then he says, blasphemy is you have all good qualities, but still I'm going to defame you. So this, there's a lot to be said about this, but we don't have a lot of time here.
Shastra Sarprada. For the close, by the way. Everyone's got places to go. We'll come back tonight at 5. Actually, we're coming back earlier because there's a hat trick grain ceremony tonight. 3 babies, count them 3. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna. A point that was made earlier that I really, really liked was the subject of Mahaprabhu being the via medium through which Radha and Krishna are attained. And I was thinking about how in most cases, there are some exceptions, in most cases whenever our acharyas directly talk about the pastimes of Radha and Krishna, their Mangalacharan verse is always about Mahaprabhu. And same thing with in the Vṛndāvana Mahimamrita. And in the last 100 verses at the beginning of it, Prabhupada Saraswati says that my path to Vṛndāvana is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because there's no hope for attaining Vṛndāvana without Mahaprabhu. And this reminded me of one verse I was hoping I could share. At the beginning of Chamatkar Chandrika, Srila Vishnu Jagadi Thakur writes a verse. I'll just read the translation. He says, "May the Lord in the form of Krishna Chaitanya, whose mercy allows us humans to touch the great astonishing ocean of Radha and Krishna and makes us thirsty for it, protect us from the set of teeth of death by continual bestowal of hope to quickly attain a drop of that ocean." So I thought that was very sweet.
Thank you. That's a good ending place to remember that we're fully...
Go on.
We've been fully accommodated. We took birth in the right yuga, and we're aligned with the acharyas who know exactly the way into the spiritual world, and we've been given the proper guidance, and it's only a matter of application. And we may notice that by applying ourselves wholeheartedly to the simple path that they've given, the results are uncommon, and they keep on coming, and there's no end to it. So we can feel especially gladdened on Radhashtami that although it's a topic that the acharyas have said should be kept above our heads and in some context is out of reach. I mean, of course, Krishna doesn't even understand it. That's why he comes as Lord Chaitanya. We're greatly blessed to have the association of the acharyas that Shastasar Prada has mentioned, who are accommodating us more and more by showing us the path of following Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And very practically, it's been handed down to us in the moods and methods given by Srila Prabhupada for us to follow. And the last word goes to Bhagavan Ashraya Prabhu.
Just a quick little point. It's very important to note that the word used here is attain rather than achieve. We can achieve so many things in the material world, but attainment again comes from the Latin, and the root word is tanere, which means to come in touch with. We are actually brought in touch with this, not that we achieve something in the spiritual world. We again get back in touch, as I was saying right at the beginning, with reality. And we are touched by that.
Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Shri Lakshmi Nrsingadev, Shri Mati Radharani on this day of Radhashtami, please empower us to follow the simple path given to us by our founder Acharya so we can be in touch with your divine mercy so that we can have the wherewithal to distribute it to others and thus please you. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer in whole or in part. Please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. If you want to see the grain ceremony, be back we're going to start at 4:15, and then all the other ceremonies will start at 5 o'clock. Everyone's welcome. Call your friends. We'll feed the whole Bay Area if they all come. Gaur Premanande Haribol.